Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to USTA Florida's Here to Serve podcast. My name is Laura Bowen. I'm the executive director here at USTA Florida, and it's March, which means we are celebrating wonderful women leaders in tennis. Today, I am excited to welcome CiCi Bellis to the podcast. Now, you may remember CiCi from her incredible match at the US Open in 2014, where as a 15-year-old, she actually won her first round match in the main draw of a Grand Slam and burst onto the professional tennis scene. What you may not know about CiCi is that in the time since she's left the tour, she earned her MBA and has become a force in the venture capital world, starting her own firm 2 years ago to invest in sports and technology. I'm excited to have CiCi on the podcast today to share her views on leadership, both from the venture capital perspective and as a new member of the USTA Board of Directors. Enjoy this episode of the pod, and as always, leave questions or comments for us on our social media. CiCi, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Yeah, I'm so excited. Thanks for having me.
It's definitely my pleasure. And of course, I'm so happy you're joining me in March because we're celebrating Women's History Month. Yay, women. And I wanted to start by asking you, who are some of the most influential women in your life, and why is it important for us to take time to celebrate and advocate for women, particularly in tennis?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, for me, my mom was a huge inspiration to me growing up. She actually started me in tennis. She played like competitive junior tennis growing up and then got me going and, kind of instilled like a really strong work ethic, like level of determination in me from a young age. And, is still my role model to this day for sure. So definitely her. And growing up watching, all the female pros on TV as I was, young and so excited about, even playing like 8, 10 and under tournaments, and watching these players on TV was so inspirational. So all of the, top Americans, when I was growing up were huge inspirations of mine. So I'd say kind of a mixture of the two.
That's awesome. We'll have to trade some good mom stories when I see you in California. 'Cause my mom's same. That's why I'm in tennis, and she's always been my inspirational woman to look up to.
Yeah.
I want to talk about you for a minute because you're an inspirational woman here in both tennis and business, and you had some incredible success as a junior tennis player. And I wanted to ask if you can talk a little bit about what it was like to reach such a high level of success as a teenager, and how did you handle the pressures that come with being a young player that's traveling and, competing at such a high level?
Yeah, 100%. And I forgot to answer your second part of your first question. I think it's so important, to have those kind of like role models for young women growing up. I think for me, I really felt like I could, become a pro tennis player because of those incredible women that I was watching on TV. And I think it really, inspires the next generation of women coming up and gives them the confidence that they, can do that too and can really do anything in the world. So wanted to touch on that too. But yeah, jumping into your next one, I think, it was really hard for me kind of like starting on tour and kind of having a lot of, media around me from the beginning. I think that was, a difficult, kind of like transitional period for me for sure. Because, I went from, junior tournaments and then right into pros where like everything was, really focused on me for a little while. So, took like kind of a transitional period, I would say, just to get used to everything and, how much, I guess, kind of like off court, things you have to factor into your pro career for sure. So, took some time getting used to and, had a really incredible team around me. So, kudos to them for sure for, not only being that like support, but also, being able to lean on them for advice, what I should be doing, what I shouldn't be doing, things like that. I think it's so important for, all pros. And I think, honestly, in every position to have such a great like support team around you. I was really lucky to have that. So definitely, contribute a lot of, my success to them for sure, if not all of it. Yeah, and then, have gotten into business now and kind of like made that transition post tennis, had a few injuries pretty early into my career. So didn't kind of want to continue that path, I guess, for me. Really wanted to try something new since I still had, still very young and wanted to kind of just try, a different path. And so transitioned into that. I feel like, that work ethic, determination I mentioned earlier. I think, that was able to really transition into the business world. And I was able to take that, kind of like, I will stay out there as long as I can, and work as hard as I can type of
Yeah.
mentality that I had in tennis and bring that into business and, try and catch up and, just be able to learn on my own and kind of have that same drive to feel like I was, kind of on the same page as, I was working in a firm. I think, I wanted to make sure I was, as knowledgeable as everyone there. I knew, even without the experience, I wanted to make sure that I knew what was going on. So I definitely feel like I took that, those characteristics over, which was good.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about that because there's a lot of studies out there that say women who play sports make really great leaders, and a lot of it is the skills and just those competencies that you talked about. The grittiness, the ability to lose, right? When you lose and when you make a mistake and when you fail to recover from that. So, question for you: when you left the tour and you decided to start your own venture fund, which I find is amazing for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that that's typically not, there's more women now, but in the past it wasn't very female dominated. There weren't a lot of women. What led you to that decision? What was that thought process of like, what, I want my own venture capital firm and I want to be a leader and I want to be able to invest, and where did that come from? Was there something from tennis that sort of carried over where you're like, no, this is where I can have the most impact? I'm just super curious about the
Yeah.
thinking.
100%. Yeah. So I grew up in the Bay Area in California and really in the Silicon Valley. So I was around venture from a really young age. I committed to play at Stanford before I turned pro, and I knew that, whether it was, post Stanford, post, tennis career, I wanted to get into venture, as my kind of like a second career in life, I guess. That came way earlier than expected, of course. And so I'd been living in Florida, training at the national campus, and a mile down the road from the training center was a really early stage sports tech focused venture firm. And so, literally, the day that I stopped playing, I actually got the opportunity to intern right away with them and
Oh,
kind of
very
get that
cool.
work experience. So, I absolutely loved it. I actually stayed with that firm 4 years. Um, Post internship, got a job there and was working there for a while. I did my MBA while I was there, and I'm sure it was kind of like the budding athlete in me that kind of like, determination and I'd been so used to leading a team while I was a pro athlete. I started to kind of get that itch again, like I wanted to build something on my own. So, after those 4 years, I really, decided it was time and yeah, went about building my own firm.
Well, I'm happy that you did, for many reasons. And one of those reasons is that we now have the benefit of your expertise as part of our USTA board. And so you're a resident of Florida. Yay. You're
Yes.
on the national board. So, my last question for you today is, what do you think is most important for our organization to focus on to attract and engage younger generations to our sport?
Yeah, it's a great question. And yeah, love being a Florida resident, huge fan of it here and love have working with you guys so far. And so excited to get even more involved. But yeah, I think, from an organizational standpoint, we want to get rackets in as many kids' hands as possible. So, for our main goal, 35 by 35 is what, we're really pushing for, 35 million players by 2035. How do we make tennis, accessible to young players? How do we get them excited about tennis? There's a lot of different ways we're planning on doing that, but it's really about, inspiring that next generation, having those leaders in the sport be able to inspire the next generation, I think is a big part of it. And just making sure they have access. Right now we have a serious, tennis court deficit in the country. They show more tennis
Especially here,
players.
we do.
Yes, absolutely, especially in Florida for sure.
Mhm.
So, figuring out ways that we can not only like close the gap on the deficit, but just utilize courts even more than what we're doing right now. So a lot of different things we have going on in the works, but it's really just about attracting those young players, getting them excited about the sport.
Well, I think you said that very well. And obviously, your acumen that you bring on the tennis side, also the business side, investing in new and different ideas are all things that we look forward to partnering with you on. We've got some exciting ideas brewing, so
Love
can't
it.
wait to get you involved and particularly have you featured as one of our women in tennis this month. So I know this won't be the last time that we have you on the podcast. And I appreciate you taking time out of your day in Indian Wells, which has looked phenomenal out there, all the tennis that's happening. So thank you for joining me today, and I will see you in another week.
I can't wait. Thanks so much, Laura.
Thanks, CiCi. That's all for this episode of the Here to Serve podcast. For more information about CiCi's journey and to learn more about our other incredible women leaders in tennis, visit USTAFlorida.com and check out our social media throughout the month of March.